Good evening, dear excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rudra Das. It's a true pleasure for me to welcome you all to this World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021, organized by Center for ADIVASI Research and Development, Odisha, in association with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and Central University of Odisha, Koraput. The broader theme of this conference is AGNOTOLOGICAL context, disciplinary practices of social sciences and policy frames. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I extend my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, and late Professor I. Ramabrahmam, former Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, and Professor Sharat Kumar Palita, Dean Biodiversity, Central University of Odisha, and acting respected Vice Chancellor of Central University of Odisha, for their cooperation and support. The convener of this August conference are eminent historian Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and eminent policy activist, writer and philanthropist Mr. Charudat Panigrahi. Friends, this evening is going to very mesmerizing for all of us because we have with us Professor Kailash Chandra Baral. So Professor Baral is currently working as a professor of India Studies at the English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad. Professor Baral is the former Pro-Vice Chancellor of EFLU and former Director of Shillong campus of EFL University. Having a teaching career over 38 years, Professor Baral has authored, edited and co-edited 10 books and has 42 publications in national and international journals and anthologies. Also, his work Theory After Derrida has been scheduled for a South Asian edition by Routledge after having been available as an e-book. He is a member of National Committee of Sahitya Academy, UGC, SAP, and Visitors Nominee in universities. We are cordially welcome you, Professor Baralji. And now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Sharat Kumar Palita, respected acting Vice Chancellor of Central University of Odisha, for giving a introductory remark. Over to you, Professor Palita.
Okay, good evening to all of you. Professor Baral, who is the presently with the EFLU and today's evening's guest of honor. Professor Baral, good evening, and all the ladies and gentlemen present here in this August gathering. As we know that today we are all meeting on behalf of CARD, who has been with the organization is very seriously. I feel this organization want to bring together all people who mean to do something for tribal development, tribal welfare, and very seriously they are organizing seminars. I hope Professor Baral is also aware of this. And Central University of Odisha, being situated in a region totally tribal dominated, and striving to do something for this Kebika region, is also seriously involved with this organization. And we want that through this organization, if you can bring or connect to the people who really mean the development of this region, particularly the language, the culture, the social aspect, all these need to be taken up. And I hope Odisha has a tremendous potentiality, and we have many of academicians who are scattered and strewn far off from Odisha, like Professor Baral, but their heart lies in Odisha, the development of Odisha, and particularly these underdeveloped regions, particularly Kebika region, of which Koraput, Bolangir, Kolandi, all these are the main central part. So with this background, the card is functioning, and this organization has also close links with this Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and this organization is also trying to bring people under its umbrella who can do something. So under this, today we have Professor Kailash Baral, who is also known as an eminent person in his field. And he is not only, I have not seen him personally, but I know about him. He has also proved himself to be a very able administrator. I hope he was for some time in Barampur University also. Is it, sir, Professor Baral? Is it's not audible?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
no. I am a different Baral. He is JK Baral.
Okay. But I feel that all those people like Professor Baral who are out of Odisha, but their heart lies in Odisha, we require their support and guidance and time to time, because we require a broader view to develop. It is not simply the politician who guides, the sociologist, the thinker, the academicians who can guide us, taking forward any nation into development. If you look to West, we know that in the West, academicians rules the roost, not the politicians. But today there is a time when we require the support of our academician friends and their goodwill. So on this aspect, today it is a very nice time. We are fortunate that Professor Baral has given us time to address all the fellow people who are under the umbrella of this card. And we give a warm welcome to Professor Baral, and wish his lecture will naturally create enthusiasm and some academic excellence in all of us. With these words, I welcome Professor Baral to this evening and for his nice lecture. Thank you to Professor Baral.
Thank you, Dr. Palita. Now, I would like to invite Professor Kailash Chandra Baral, and Professor Baral will be talking about humanities today, discipline, indiscipline, and post-discipline. Over to you, sir.
Okay, very good evening to all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. A very good evening to all of you. And many thanks to Professor Palit for his very kind words about me. Yeah, I have served outside Odisha for last 42 years. And I make little correction about my bio. Actually, I am already superannuated in 2019. And till that time, I was Pro Vice Chancellor, and for a while, holding the charge of the Vice Chancellor. That was 42 years of teaching at the universities. Because after my MA, I just joined the university, that is Northeastern University, a central university. At that time, the 7th central university. Nowadays, it's difficult to count the central universities. That is my journey. And as we are talking about CARD, I'm very, very happy to know about this institution. And actually, this particular meeting today, actually, it makes me very happy, doubly happy, that it was an accidental occasion in which Professor Nanda and myself, we had some conversation. And it was a Bikram who picked up that thread, and incidentally, he invited me to this talk. And I think this idea of having a series of talks was going on with thinking minds associated with the card. And ultimately, it fell upon me to start the initiative. I am really honored and privileged to associate myself with the card, and also with Central University of Odisha, Koraput. I know from its genesis, from its beginning, and I hope that things will move forward for this university. As far as my association with the tribals is concerned, I have worked 20 years in Northeast with many tribes, and therefore I'm familiar with tribes. Of course, the Northeast tribes are far advanced in comparison to the Odisha tribes, but there are certain things academically we can discuss, and we can also suggest to the policymakers that what could be the right type of approach, to address the concerns of the tribal brothers and sisters. Today I am going to talk about humanities today, and I think you should bear with me that my talk I felt would be exactly 1 hour 10 minutes. And if it exceeds a little, you can excuse me. And if I finish it before that, that is my credit because I have adjusted to my time very well. This is broadly, a general talk. I have not gone to the specifics, but at the end of the talk, I wish that if there are questions, I would like to give specific examples. I would be talking basically the philosophical tradition of humanities and where we stand in India regarding the disciplines of humanities and how do we transact the dissemination of humanities knowledge in our country. And now, as I have already said, the discourse of humanities addresses a whole host of issues concerning man, primarily attempting an inquiry into what makes us human and examining various knowledge domains of human culture, thereby differentiating us from the non-human. Institutions, political, academic, legal, economic, and social, function in ways deepening our understanding by addressing questions: what is proper to man, right of man, human welfare, crimes against humanity, human creativity and actions, human reflections and performances, and so on. As a body of knowledge, humanities are domain specific as we differentiate between old, new, critical, and digital humanities. The field of humanities apparently is expanding, but at the same time, concerns are being raised that the field is in deep crisis and embattled. These concerns be real for the moment, submit to the demands of political, industrial, military economies, moving towards promotion of a techno-scientific education at the cost of humanities. Further, ideological indoctrinations are resulting in academic activism that has eroded the intellectual legacy of the field. Humanities education today, instead of fulfilling its larger goal of producing ethical, productive, inquiring minds, has produced a large number of certified graduates, creating knowledge inequities and skill deficit. Let me first qualify the key terms in the title of my presentation. Discipline here means an academic discipline that underlines a body of knowledge that has been refined over a period of time, getting the sanction of the academic curriculum for the purpose of disseminating knowledge. It has a well-defined objective that separates it from the disciplines and also limits its actions within some unmarked boundary. Indiscipline would mean crossing the boundary, not to mean cross-disciplinary crossings, but as an antinomy to discipline, implying internal incoherence within a discipline lacking in epistemic inwardness, as Arjun Appadurai has said, and externally would imply politicization of disciplinary mandates that we all experience, the interventions, political and otherwise, that happens when you talk about disciplinary protocols. And of course, post-discipline raises many questions regarding democratizing education in general to meet diverse aspirations of our learners, thereby liberalizing education in terms of equality and accessibility, while offering choices to a learner, as has been envisaged in the new education policy, which of course I am not going to discuss here. In my presentation, I would broadly talk about the status of teaching humanities in Indian universities in contextualizing disciplinary protocols, indiscipline and post-discipline challenges. Marcus Tullius Cicero, I think you must have heard about him, Cicero. The Roman rhetorician used the term humanitas, literally meaning human nature, for training of orators in his work De Orate of the Orator in 55 BC. However, the concept of humanities has its origin in the Greek concept of a pedia, as we talk about encyclopedia these days, and the Greek term, the initial Greek term for that is enkykleos. Enkykleos, that is, encyclopedia has been derived from enkykleos and pedia. And it means complete system or a large compendium of knowledge as a form of general education advanced by the sophists in the 5th century BCE. St. Augustine, himself a rhetorician in the early Middle Ages, adopted a pedia and humanitas, or what is called the good subjects or the liberal subjects, as they were to a program of a basic Christian education. And that included mathematics, linguistic, and philosophical studies, and some history, philosophy, and science were also included. Studia humanitas, that is, study of humanity, was the broad area of study during the Renaissance, underwent transformation as a curricular program during the Renaissance because of an explosion in knowledge on the universe we live in and man's place in it, replacing the medieval anthropocentric worldview. As a consequence, a secular literary tradition was established that promoted secular literary and scholarly activities in grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, moral philosophy, and studies in ancient Greek and Latin classics, excluding theology and divine knowledge. In the 18th century, Denis Diderot, actually spelled as D-I-D-R-O-T, Diderot, one among the French encyclopedists, censured studies humanitas, freeing it from dogma and introducing knowledge studies based on reason and truth. As you know, reason and truth are the two most important elements of the Enlightenment project. As a key figure of Enlightenment, Diderot influenced liberal education following what Lessing, another German philosopher, said: the real power of reason lay not in the possession, but in the acquisition of truth. By the 19th century, when the purview of the humanities expanded, the humanities had begun to take their identity not so much from their separation from the realm of the divine as from their exclusion of the material and methods of physical sciences, which tended to examine the world and its phenomena objectively without reference to human meaning and purpose. The last expression is important, that science obviously followed a kind of objectivity that excluded what is called human meaning and purpose, which is actually very central to the study of humanities. Study of humanities in our context remains a colonial European legacy, a violent epistemic project that epistemologically negated any inquiry into our pre-colonial knowledge systems, thereby promoting a method of inquiry that has strongly laid the European or colonial footprint of a linear understanding of our sense of being and knowing. Actually, this linear sense of history is very, very important, because the Europeans have already even given the period of Ramayana and Mahabharata. This is the part of the linear. I'm not going into the details, just briefly, just telling you linear part of the history. But you will find in India there was another mechanism which was available and is still practiced, what is called the astrological calculations. With the astrological calculations, you will be more accurate than the linear historical method followed by the Europeans. Unfortunately, we dare not use the Indian method because we have been so much into the European method that we cannot do without it. Therefore, what has happened because of the colonial footprint, what has happened that the necessity and purpose, that is why, nature and substance, what, the mode and matter, how, and context and location, where, of Indian knowledge systems were ignored or devoted to suit to the colonial project. Here, I would like to refer to one of my friends and a very great scholar, D. Venkata Rao, a scholar of critical humanities, observes the European episteme in its manifold forms tears apart the native form, his or her long cherished epistemic and epistemological effective practical experience. One gets wrenched apart from the reflective imaginative sphere of one's existence. In a sense, one loses one's language, which birthed and socked the fibers and tissues, flows, and ways of one's life. 2 centuries of such sustained violence has resulted in a cognitive, imaginative destitution in cultures that faced colonialism. One of the sides of colonial education was the university in India. That is a colonial transplant and continues to perpetuate the epistemic legacy of the West, even in post-independent India, in that we continue to search for a home through the address of the West. Finding the address of a home through the address of the West has blunted our creative, imaginative impulse so much that we have lost our moorings. Such a phenomenon is promoted by the universities that we have modeled on the West without debating what type of universities we need. Because we are not only a diverse country, but our heterogeneous cultural resources need a different and differentiated critical approach to make humanities education meaningful. Let us for a moment glance at the history of universities in India as a kind of Western legacy. Let us look at how it evolved in the West, then we'll come to the Indian context. The university in the West, the university evolved as an idea before it took shape in a physical term. William von Humboldt established the first modern university in Berlin in 1810, and this university became a model for all modern universities in the West. The idea of a university largely was a product of the Western Enlightenment and was held forth by Kant under his 3 regulations of reason, truth, reason, culture, and excellence. Humboldt, a great advocate of liberalism, visualized a sublimation of the normative force of reason in a culture of liberal thinking that could make the university a place reclusive in character, but suitable to pursue and produce knowledge for a wider dissemination. The epistemic shift from religious to secular learning transformed a university into a place for the unity of teaching and research that engaged not only in assimilation and transmission of existing knowledge, but also become a center for the creation of new knowledge. Bill Readings has published a book in around 1996 with a kind of a nostalgia and also with some kind of frustration with the functioning of the modern universities. As he says, the title of his book is The Universities in Ruins. That is the title of the book. And he says, conforming to the Kantian position and the beginning of the university, that on what ideas the foundations were laid out. He says, I quote here Bill Readings, the characteristics of the modern university is to have an idea that functions as its referent, as the end and meaning of its activities. Kant's vision is followed by Humboldt's idea of culture, and more recently, the emphasis has been on the techno-bureaucratic notion of excellence. The distinguishing feature of the last one in this list is that it actually lacks a referent. That is to say, the idea that functions as the university's referent excellence itself has no referent. The University of Excellence is the simulacrum of the idea of a university. Now, what Reading is trying to say here, which is very, very pertinent to our context today, because I think I'm free to say this. A few years back, I would not have been able to say. We are having institutional, framework within which universities are evaluated. That is very unfortunate. Similarly, we have, publications which are also, rated according to the list of UGC reference list. And these are this quantification mechanism of your scholarship, of your institutional functioning and everything, I think is not favorable to the idea of a university. And this is actually the point he's trying to say, that the idea has a reference, that when I can't talk about, let us say, truth and culture and other things, he has a reference, that is the excellence of the mind. But when we are talking some institutions as excellent in the world list, they are number 4 or 10, it doesn't say about that, because the measurements that are being made are mostly material. How many buildings you have, what is your faculty student ratio, and blah, 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 what holding you have in the library, how many publications the teachers publish. These are very, very normative kind of things which could be physically measured. But who measures the intellectual status of a university, the intellectual wealth of a university? How do you measure that intellectual wealth? These are some of the contradictions that the modern universities face. And India is very jumpy about these measurements, and we have created a lot of measurement things. And ultimately, I don't know where it will end, because we are still under the influence of the Western kind of ideas. Reading's argument in this sense exemplifies how an idea seeks a referent, hence a university seeks an epistemological mooring, wherein ideas internal and external to a university, stated and unstated, keep on evolving and become generative. If the generative character of an idea is reduced to a techno-bureaucratic concept such as excellence and non-referent, it remains as a simulacrum of that idea, copy of that idea, image of that idea. Dilthus attempt to balance natural science with the humanities using understanding continue to be reflected upon in Habermas' insistence on moral culture, in that the entire intellectual life of a nation can be focused in the institutions of a higher learning. That is precisely what Professor Palit has said, that the academicians in the West actually are more respected that they are in India. Because in India, everything is doing a job actually. Nobody understands because what chair you are holding, what post you are holding, but the intellectual tradition and the intellectual commitment to a discipline, to a subject, to education for that matter is never counted. Cardinal Newman, another person who also talks about a university, and he has a famous book published long back in 1907, The Idea of a University, as to its function, the true and adequate end of intellectual training again, wherein thought or reason is expressed upon knowledge. The instrumentality of reason seems to be the very life force of a modern university, as Robert Young underlines in his essay, The Idea of a Crestomathic University. Hence, at the site of intellectual practice, there happens a sublimation of the ethical rational. For Fichte, Fichte has actually, another German philosopher has visualized a very interesting idea about the university, as he says, that the guiding principle of a university should be the birthplace of a future emancipated society. Therefore, it is the university, through the dissemination of knowledge, it can really create the future of an emancipated society. Therefore, when we talk about emancipation, democracy, and diversity, to strengthen all these ideas, or maybe some of these institutions, that the contribution of universities are immense. If in the West, the university emerged as an idea, later on get translated into its physical form, a product of a prolonged philosophical churning, in India, the university is simply a colonial transplant. These universities have nothing to do with India's medieval universities like Nalanda or Taxila, because their origin stories are totally different from the modern universities in India. The establishment of Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras universities by the colonial government in 1857 did not have any genealogical and historical connection with India's ancient and medieval centers of learning. These universities are primarily extensions of the European modernist paradigm. Through these universities, the teaching of a modern Western education was reinforced, in that colonialism became a pedagogical enterprise. As a transplant, the colonial modern university in India overlooked or ignored the real India as an object of study, with its socio-cultural complexities and their imperatives. The colonial civilizing mission was also defined in linguistic terms. Macaulay emphasized, among other things, the English language's intrinsic superiority of reason, thereby discounted all Indian languages that they are the blubbing of mad people. That is the kind of implication that these languages do not have the capacity to reason, and therefore English language has the superiority of reason. Be it as it may, there are other concerns and contestations that have been written about and debated, such as university education vis-a-vis Indian nationalism, secularism, Western knowledge systems, post-colonial modernity, and translating the colonial agenda into action with the objective of producing an educated workforce for the colonial government, and so on. The colonial pedagogic enterprise had two clear objectives. First, to teach Indians a diffusion of the improved arts, sciences, philosophy, and literature of Europe. In short, European knowledge. I'm quoting from Said, who has a very good book called The Subject Relations, published in 2007. Secondly, to supplant indigenous knowledges, that is Oriental knowledge, that was condemned as superstitious, mythic, primitive, and more generally, untrue. European modernity, through the agency of a colonial rule, reached India not only through the universities, but through other institutions and agencies as well, as it is claimed. And this is a quotation I am again, citing from SET. A textbook of 1897 told its audience of Indian schoolboys that the penal code, public works, railways, irrigation, and civil works, schools, the post office and telegraph, and a free press were all forces working to educate India. Therefore, educating India was not only through the schools or the universities and colleges that the colonials flattered themselves, making a huge claim that they were educating Indians through the penal code, through the railways, through the post office, through all institutions they have created. Incidentally, the irony is all these institutions were created in order to promote the colonial objectives. To educate India was not certainly to emancipate India. That was the crux. To educate India was not certainly to emancipate India, but to mold Indians differently as knowing subjects of the European knowledge, thereby creating a context for the negation of Indian knowledge systems. The post-colonial university system in India continued with the colonial organization's structure and objectives, because the university in India did not evolve as an idea reflective of its cultural, intellectual inheritance and social aspiration. That is the main gap. Still today, the universities that are created are certainly the same transplant, or you can say they are actually the clones of the colonial universities. Hence, it prioritizes its priorities and objectives are misplaced and misconstrued. The universities in India continue to be challenged from within as well as from without. The commissions on education, most famously of Radhakrishnan and of Kothari with Edward Seals, as a member to reform Indian education system with their comprehensive and productive contributions, did not result in their acceptance in entirety. The Indian universities, in Seal's view, have become mass universities where students come for degrees, for suitable employment, and not for enlightened knowledge. It is in this context that Andre Bethe, who is a famous sociologist and worked in Delhi University, he has written a fantastic book on the universities in India. The title of the book is Universities at the Crossroads, published in 2010. Is a significant work. His work is an extended reflection on the history, curricular, non-curricular mandate, and other challenges, including the social dimensions of higher education in the country. Bethe expresses his anxieties and articulates forcefully the malaise that afflicts Indian universities today. He maintains the awareness of the continuing changes taking place in our universities, and the universities throughout the world obliges us to take a historical view of the university as both a center of learning and a social institution. Besides its history, what is more important for discussion here is the changing character of the university as a social institution. The university today is challenged in trying to adjust to the changing demography and governmental policies. It is therefore important that the disciplinary economies need to be factored in the debates on caste, gender, tribe, and marginality, under whatever designations they may appear, whether under protected discrimination or quotas within quotas. The marginal, the stigmatized, are the excluded within the Indian society, or the excluded within the Indian society, or the so-called excluded within the Indian society have arrived, not seeking only education, but also with diverse aspirations. With the changing social aspirations, universities have to adjust to a new sociology that challenges the old ethical, rational structure of the university and its curricular mandate. Such a challenge has forced the universities to stretch their capacity in terms of admissions, accommodation, classrooms, and other infrastructure. The university, in spite of being conceived as a secular democratic institution with the policy interventions of the state, has become a center for conflicting interests and competing ideological struggle. Such conflicts have a spiraling effect on ideological wars, caste skirmishes, and community interests. In the process, new icons have adorned the university walls and new slogans have dominated campus politics. The so-called commonality of purpose and cooperative consciousness, supposed to be the core of a university, is undermined in that dispassionate pursuit of knowledge about the world and the human society in transcending narrow groups of social boundaries have come under serious stress, as well as interrogation. Mass has replaced merit, and the voice of the enlightened minority is silenced. It is time we revisit Gandhi's idea of Nai Talim, or new education. Gandhi visualized a new social order totally different from the existing one. For Gandhi, education not only brings liberation, but it becomes a catalyst in the transforming process of a society. Therefore, our education is lacking that catalyst, how to make our society better. And if we go and revisit Gandhi and understand Gandhi in proper context, I'm sure that some of the Gandhi's ideas, not all of them now at this stage, would certainly help us that the education could be an instrument for social change. Instead, we have followed an ambivalent, of course, with Gandhi, we have always followed an ambivalence kind of attitude, and somewhere Gandhi has been, redundant in our whole thinking. The crisis that haunts humanities, I'm coming to the main focus of what I am supposed to talk about. The crisis that haunts humanities education today is not coming from the disciplinary challenger science or technology, as it is said, but from within. As Appadurai says, for lacking in epistemic inwardness. Epistemic inwardness is necessary to discipline to overcome confused understanding of the social reality and disciplinary mandate. The indiscipline at the level of the institution has subverted institutional moral authority from within, throwing away its foundational principle of the ethical rational. Some of the new disciplines, such as, this is a fancy, actually, UGC from time to time offers some money to start a discipline. One is exclusion studies. Similarly, there is now a new course program is offered in many universities, Northeast Studies. And Utkala University, I was surprised to see they also have a center of Northeast Studies, and they have created it. I don't know what they're doing there. Once I was invited to give a talk, I came to understand that to understand Northeast is they send students for academic tour to Northeast states. If that means Northeast studies, I still don't understand. What is happening with some of these very exclusionary studies or exclusionary disciplines? And what I was talking about is that the university is a place where there is a cooperative consciousness, in the sense that these days we talk about multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, all these things. But all these things actually are derived from the very core of the principle of the university, that it exists and flourishes on the basis of what is called a cooperative consciousness that primarily is, conversations across disciplines. That when we do conversations across disciplines, we agree, we disagree, and we also follow some kind of a disciplinary objective that, as sociology and anthropology, they move parallelly, and more or less you will find they deal with similar kind of subjects, but the focus is different. In one case it is anthropological, where in another case it's sociological. Similarly, there are what we call contiguous subjects, and there are subjects which are totally reversed from each other. Now, in that sense, if exclusion studies says that the hitherto knowledge in India produced is Brahminical, and we have nothing to do with that, then can we possibly make a meaningful conversation between the so-called traditional Indian knowledge systems and the new knowledge that is being produced by the center? And this is what I mean to say epistemic inwardness, that if we don't have an inward look, what will happen is that our discipline automatically from within will be incoherent. Therefore, any academic discipline must promote and encourage what we call cross-disciplinary conversations. When a plural conversations across disciplines, the life force of disciplinary protocols take a back seat. How can a learning be democratized? There are meaningless departments without having any disciplinary. This is left to the fancy of some of the very smart vice chancellors. They create some kind of departments. And I'm giving a reference of EFLU, where I worked for 20 years, that one of the first vice chancellor for our university, just to get somebody appointed into the faculty, created a department of resource generation. What is the mandate of a department of resource generation? Resource generation could be a cell under the administration, that you want to generate the resources and you formulate the policies how to generate resources. You cannot have a resource generation department, academic department. What kind of resource generation academic department will do? I just didn't understand this department. Anyway, finally this department was closed down. And now what I'm trying to say here is that there is no rigorous analysis or interrogation of the ontological necessity of the disciplinary frame. And you will find there are so many hybrid departments these days have been created. And ultimately what happens, these departments replicate the works of other departments. What other departments are doing, these departments also do. Just with a little change here, and there is no substantial difference in the work of these departments. And personally, I feel this is actually a huge waste of resources, valuable resources. As a consequence, research at the universities has become an endeavor for aggregation of numbers instead of authentic contribution to knowledge in terms of worth and value. Now, often we indulge in this kind of meaningless exercise, comparing the number of PhDs coming from Chinese universities that to Indian universities. And I think we are still lagging behind. But what I feel is this is an aggregation, but nobody talks about the quality of these PhDs. In what way they create new knowledge, as I have mentioned earlier, that one of the objectives is not only to disseminate knowledge, but to add to the existing knowledge and create new knowledge. The value coding of a discipline needs to be responsive to the university framework from where it originates in terms of teaching and research, and then to society and to its context in terms of its relevance. The university is a place for producing archival and referential knowledge, as we all know. In a broader sense, advancing our knowledge and understanding of what makes us a human and the end of man, in bringing together the imaginative, creative, and the rational with an objective of awakening in a learner and integrated consciousness. Education has to be looked at as a cultural process in traditions captured in the arts, history, philosophy, and in human sciences so that the learner is equipped with agency. Now this in a different context, which I actually, there are a lot of things I could have discussed. I deliberately kept it out. But agency is very important. This is a concept which is important because education, that is a broader kind of thing. We talk about education liberates, but actually education empowers. And once we are empowered, we gain in agency. And therefore, education must ensure that agency to a learner. Foucault raises question against a subjugated knowledge that constrains agency. Therefore, we should not have subjugated knowledge. We need to have creative interaction with any body of knowledge, and that knowledge which we receive should be generative. It should actually create in our mind that kind of capacity to think independently. While speaking to power from a position of subordination, marginalization, Foucault acknowledges innumerable points of confrontation, focuses of instability, each of which has its own risks of conflict, of struggles, and of at least temporary inversion of the power relations. I quote Foucault here. In a reverse reading of Foucault, it may be argued that in the inversion of power relations, the authority of a university as an autonomous, liberal, humanist institution today is more vulnerable as it is challenged by the illegalities of the affirmation of inalienable rights. Mark these words, illegalities of the affirmation of inalienable rights. Therefore, what happens is that there are a lot of illegalities that are being perpetuated or imposed on the university as such. Such a situation leaves us with questions: who then stands for the rights of a university? I'm not talking about the individuals, I'm not talking about the discipline, I'm not talking about the learner. University as an institution, who stands for it? The government finances it. Does the government own it? If the government owns it, then what about the autonomy of the university? Is the autonomy of the university is heavily compromised? Now, if that is so, then the foundational principle of the idea of a university, which is reclusive in character, should engage in a dispassionate, dissemination of knowledge and research, is also compromised. Because autonomy, I'm not talking about autonomy of functioning, I'm talking about autonomy of a mind. If autonomy of intellectual mind is compromised, or if it is under pressure for some reason or the other, then you cannot actually advance new knowledge. That is my understanding. Such a situation leaves us with the questions: who then stands for the rights of a university? How does a university structured within the legal regulative frame addresses a particular type of liberty? University creation is, it undergoes a bill, goes to the parliament or assembly. We know it has a legal framework, but university is also, a site in order to ensure intellectual liberty. But that particular kind of liberty, who actually protects? In the regulations, it is not there. In the acts, it is not there, and that is a problem. Further, how in such a scenario dissemination of knowledge, pedagogic transaction takes place? Reading Foucault elsewhere, the point I am arguing becomes clear that power relations conceptualized as the power of action to induce other actions makes one realize that power relations are rooted deep in the social nexus, not reconstituted above society as a supplementary structure. As a result, no claim is worthwhile to criticize the workings of an institution supposedly neutral and independent, and examine its processes whether or not it fulfills social obligations without compromising its mandate. But it is a fact today that its very foundational principles are rendered redundant. In our context, if a new politics of a truth has to manifest, there is a need to seriously engage with the indiscipline that afflicts the universities. The new politics of truth can only arrive when we bring in the learning subject to conversation, because we have an obligation to the students, to the learners. The conversation is possible within the pedagogic frame. However, in our context, pedagogic transaction is pathologized to an extent that the case of the caste of a teacher has become problematic, not how he teaches or what he teaches. Similarly, even ideological motives are attributed to a text. You must have heard the famous controversy in Delhi University, Ramanujan's 300 Ramayans, that book which was prescribed, has to be taken out from the syllabus. Now, these kind of things are actually very terrible in a university which is mandated to have the intellectual, freedom. The minority that stands for reasoned voice in a university is silenced even by legal interventions. It is no longer possible to ask whether a teacher enlightens us or not, whether text is deep and enriching or not. It has become normal to accept many illegalities that are constructed and forced upon by ideological imperatives. How do we then negotiate between the core values of humanities and the dissemination of humanistic knowledge to enrich the self-knowledge of the knowing subject? If teaching of the humanities has to be a sustained effort to strengthen the continuity of life and culture, as George Steiner has rightly said, and to differentiate between the universal and the contingent, nature and culture, local and global, tradition and technology, we need to rethink many issues. George Gadamer argues that the disciplines in humanities for their sustenance need to be placed in philosophical hermeneutics that allows a diffusion of horizons. Unfortunately, Gadamer may not be relevant in our context today, for the humanities education no longer seeks a philosophical hermeneutics with a historical awareness and literary aesthetic understanding. Instead, its study is directed to challenge the idea of knowledge as a culture, asking questions such as whose knowledge, whose culture. In the process, it leaves little or no room to draw together diverse methods and pursuits for diffusion of horizons. Thus, to make a shift from social diversity to intellectual diversity is only possible if we follow Appadurai's reasoned argument for a move from cultural diversity to culture of diversity within disciplinary protocols. Teaching of the humanities following its primary goal to know the world with an awakened self-knowledge is constrained by other considerations today. Foucault's concern to ascertain the possibility of continuing a new politics of truth bears upon our fresh endeavors to recast humanities with a deeper understanding of Gandhi's advocacy for a new social order, using education as a transformative process. If teaching at the universities has to be on the side of truth and critical judgment, allowing a learner to discover the depth, richness, and beauty of the humanities, it is a time we ponder over the crisis that afflicts the humanities education in our country. As it battles to survive in a techno-commercial utilitarian academic structure and burdened with a caste, class, gender, and other social factors where truth is no longer self-evident, but manipulated and manufactured, there is a need for the humanities to redefine itself in the changing context of education. Thank you for your patience. I think I have exceeded. No, I think exactly it is 1 hour. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kailash, for a wonderful deliberation. Now, I would like to invite the convener of this August conference, Professor Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, to go for a remark over Professor Kailash's talk. Over to you, Professor Nanda.
Yep. Thank you, Rudra, for allowing me to say a few things. In fact, Professor Baral, after my last talk with him a few weeks back, yeah, it's simply how do I express it? It's something always interesting and also very provocative to listen to an expert from the domain of culture studies, particularly Professor Baral, with his immense engagement in practices where he tries to look at culture, the culture of disciplinary practices as such. Uh, uh, Networks of theoretical understandings that has come up in the last right since 19th century, and to translate these ideas in the context of his own understanding as an academic to the domains of both the disciplines he's trying to look at in the context of South Asia, particularly vis-a-vis the way disciplinary frameworks have evolved via Europe or West, and the way they have been practiced in South Asia. That's why we could hear, I mean, very fascinating integration of he's talking about Gandhi and talking about Foucault, talking about Gadamer, and it's very interesting insights into the idea of culture of like he said, instead of I could put it that way, culture of pluralities, something like that. What I mean, as I could understand from his very serious reflection over the what he said, the site university to be seen as a site, and the kind of politics being played around it, and taking a position trying to defend this site in terms of uh, looking at this site as a production of new politics of truth, new regime of truth, the way Gandhi or Foucault had signaled, is really very difficult. Is really very difficult to fathom. I mean, how do I do that? Uh, in the whole regime of rhetorics that has been going around all of us in terms of knowledge, truth, uh, in the context of 21st century, when technology has become decisive in terms of producing knowledge, and statist or state funded resources has been formed into many areas of research and teaching. As I said, try to come up with examples of Center for Exclusion and Inclusion, or Center for Northeast Studies. When there are ideas of expansion of knowledge is proliferating, at the same time, somewhere we are missing out on certain fundamental idea of how do we need to do that. What would be the ethical way of doing it, doing this kind of, reorganization of knowledge, or I can put it that way, that re-engineering of uh, the knowledge tradition, something like that. So this is something which he has offered to understand, that how do we configure the whole ecology of knowledge, the way it has been evolving in the last 2 centuries, uh, right since post-enlightenment time, right since 19th century, when we called ourselves much modern and we became part of this modern knowledge discourse, or we claimed that we are into the culture of political modernity, and part of that we had a knowledge system which was absolutely uh, which is absolutely I won't be able to play on to my video from some regions. It's just on a move. The point that I have been trying to emphasize, that Professor Baral's talk illuminates with examples of how do we try to uh, make sense of the horizons of knowledge, where we try to really think through the idea of ethics embedded into it. That is one. And secondly, a very enriching dialogue, by establishing a kind of enriching dialogue uh, between Foucault and Gandhi. Perhaps it reminded me that we're again revisiting this idea of provincializing Europe. You know, uh, the way Europe has been made to be dominant in our knowledge system. Europe means it's not a geographical Europe, but a Europe which is hyper real in many sense, and a Europe from where all epistemic ideas generate, and we appropriate this, we mimicry this. And when we try to provincialize this Europe, we need to do it with certain sense of our own imagination, with certain sense of our own creativity, with certain sense of our own as has been thought through by important intellectuals from our part of the world, whether it is Gandhi or Vivekananda, or for that matter, a series of other people who have been thinking about their own social realities, about their own regions, about their own ways of being human, about their own ways of uh, you know, redefining the idea of equality, justice, or a kind of global order, uh, which could be, which may not entirely fit in to the idea of political modernity, the way it has been framed as a kind of universal truth. So the point that he has been repeatedly emphasizing, the new politics of truth, the new idea of truth, as has been gestured towards by philosophers like Foucault or Gadamer, could make seminal sense to at least revisit the whole tradition of political Western political thought at the first instance. But at the second level, when we try to look at our own realities, for example, he was trying to of zeroing on this idea of university as a site of production of knowledge, and being a academic of 40 years, perhaps he has uh, you know he must have had a very interesting professional career, where he must have seen how things really get practiced. As an academic, he must have taught. As an academic, he must have felt the pulses through which state tries to dictate terms, and state gets into his voice to say this or that, or makes him craft a policy. which he refuses or which he accepts to sometime, or which he tries to neutralize sometime. But at the end of it, when he comes out of this career, perhaps today or tomorrow or next moment, I mean, after 40 years, he now realizes that the kind of empirical experiences which has gone into the making of his professional career for 30, 40 years, uh, when they are conversed uh, with a conceptual register, vis-a-vis a conceptual register, he realizes that these things, I mean, he very strongly defends for autonomy of this site. For example, a very clear example he tried to tell us that taking off the Ramanujan's idea of Ramayanas, multiple Ramayanas, was not a kind of decision which could have been accepted by at any point of time by the intelligentsia. But ultimately, the power uh, embedded in the state is always important. And if the agencies or the institutions, the policy institutions which are responsible for spelling out the policies for educational institutions, they get into the making of these sites, or they remain instrumental in the making of the sites, then that becomes dangerous. But with this kind of straight thoughts, I would like to know from Professor Baral, which is very interesting, that he has been talking about, Foucault. Obviously, we know that Foucault is incredibly, complex and incredibly tempting, and also incredibly provocative in terms of understanding the nuanced complexities of power, power structure, power relations. That is one. And he was also talking about Gadamer. Uh, but how it's also always interesting to see a cultural expert, a person who was a very serious orientation, critical orientation in terms of cultural studies. How do you configure Heidegger, and how much of Heideggerian insight comes to you, or comes or illuminates your own understanding when you look at the idea of margin, idea of periphery, and how do you and when you try to uh, you know in translating these periphery and margins to a very visible or a very palpable signs of you know kind of signs of reality, and in certain ways they remain as the Chakravarti has said, as kind of subaltern past which tries to puncture any kind of idea of universal truth, something like that. So I'd like to hear from you any quick and very, I think this would be very foundational when we learn from you some your reflections and your engagement with Heidegger. How do you locate him to 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 make sense of this idea of knowledge and idea of marginality? Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Professor Nanda, for I would say it is a summary. You have added more things to my presentation, and maybe you have offered some clarity. Regarding Foucault and Gandhi, I reserve my explanation. I will come back later on. And I would start with Heidegger. The whole idea here is, I will go to the foundation of the philosophical tradition in the West, is that you would find there are certain concepts like will and idea, this Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, they talk about these things, and they are actually away from Kant or called the Neo-Kantians. There are different type of Neo-Kantians. Even this Russian thinker. Anyway, I'm forgetting. Just I'll get back to that. What has happened is in the West, the center of the philosophical tradition is the self. Let's start from here. Now the self, or as it was called cogito by Descartes, then Kant revised it and gave a clear definition of the self. And this self is not a kind of a not self. It is a knowing self. It knows about the human purpose, human activities, and ultimately those the philosophical construct around the self, the knowing self, is that there is a human purpose. There is a human purpose, or there is a purpose in existence. There are meanings in activities and actions and all these things. And later on, they are politically formulated as dominant, subordinate, these kind of things. And when you come to Hegel, this particular knowing subject also has a consciousness, what is called a historical consciousness. That this knowing subject is also conscious of the past, or it could also visualize a future on the basis of that. By the time, actually, they started with Heidegger in his concept of a Dasein. And when we come to Derrida, and after, with Derrida and Foucault, what happened? That the self become the subject. Look at, there is a huge difference between the philosophical construct of the self with a Kant and the philosophical construct of the subject, which was derived from Heidegger's preliminary inquiry into the self, and later on, that is being and non-being, being and non-being. If one exists, the other gets cancelled. Therefore, he says that, to write that you write decision and cross it. Therefore, it now, what happens here is that when we come to Foucault, Foucault talks about the subject positions, subject relations, and subject is at the center of all kind of power relations. Power, authority, power, this thing, that thing. But what I'm trying to correlate here is that the phenomenon vis-a-vis knows its own position in that world. And if I try to explain it in that way, but there is one purpose that we can easily connect to, the idea of Nietzsche's will to power. Whether power, as Foucault defines, is different, but there was a will to power that everybody wills to achieve something, and there is therefore he's prepared with some kind of action. And these philosophical concepts, in whatever way you look at, even existentialist, I find in the Western philosophical tradition gives a lot of emphasis to the self. And later on, when we come to the 20th century, and when we talk about the other, then the self-other kind of division that started actually with Hegel, and the further extension of that otherization is the product of the subaltern kind of idea. I actually, somehow or other, I refrain myself talking about the subaltern theories, because their reference is from this and some of the other thinkers of the European left. That is how this otherization, other things come, or what is called the subjugated people, or the people who not only speak, but their speech has been hijacked by the powers of others. Therefore, they are rendered speechless, they cannot speak. And that is where the question about the subaltern question of agency is problematic. Because within the subaltern, the Gayatri Spivak's famous essay, can the subaltern speak? That poses a very, very strong idea, a strong problematic, about the speech of the subaltern. Even if the subaltern speaks, what register the subaltern will use? Is it possible that the subaltern always uses a register of resistance? And if he is using resistance, what is he resisting against? Therefore, the point I was making about the politics of the university of grading the universities, hierarchizing the universities, like excellence using, that is what is being said, that excellence is a word without a referent. Now, therefore, when we talk about truth, particularly in the context of Foucault's concept of a truth is that a truth, like the subject, which is a product of so many factors in the society, truth is also a product like that. There are many vectors that contribute to the production of a particular truth. And therefore, what happens is that truth is legitimized by certain interest groups as a truth. Now that is the point. Now this is as in Odia it is said tini tundare mankada kukura or something like that. The three people say something is like this, then the truth is established. You can actually take a reference from there, that truth is legitimized by groups, those who have their own interest in that. Therefore, truth is to a large extent, according to Foucault, is manufactured. And this is critical, where we should understand Foucault, that Foucault says that not only that we are subjugated by a particular type of a truth, but we are also subjugated by the knowledge that the truth has produced. See, that is the problem. And this is where I want to give a reference in the Indian context. As you know, knowledge is a vidya, and vidya is very well classified, para vidya, apara vidya, and it is also hierarchized in the sense that para is all your vidya about the material world, about everything, what you do, or human world, or any world you talk about. But apara is something which is, not concerning this world. It is about the other world, or a superior world, which is intuitive, which is a transcending, or a kind of impulse to move towards that. Now, in the West, as I said, that the whole Western philosophical tradition has invested itself on the concept of the self. And how that particular concept from consciousness or cogito to self to subject, and parallelly on the other side, how its a construction is based on a particular type of truth. Therefore, Kant has a particular way of looking at truth, and maybe Heidegger has a particular understanding of truth, and let us say Hegel also has the historical truth, maybe, if we understand in that way, because it has a great sociological impact about the historical truth. And you come to Foucault. You have rightly said that Foucault is a very complex thinker. I do agree with that. And Foucault's actually concerns about the post-truth is very important, because we are postmodern, or what do we call post-human society we are living in, as you have rightly said, and my intention is also like that, that when human actions are no longer predictable to a particular type of meaning, it is mediated by technology. Technology mediates our understanding, our purpose, our meanings. Then what happens? And the nature of that truth is a post-truth. Now, this is where, what are the challenges before the humanities? On the one hand side, Gandhi's idea of a new society is a responsibility for us, because we belong to a post-colonial country. And Foucault's challenge of getting over the subjugated truth, subjugated knowledge, equally challenging, that we must not only liberate teaching, liberate our pedagogic practice, we not only meet the aspiration of the learners, but we must also liberate ourselves from the subjugated knowledge of the West. Therefore, we can be creative, looking at our own heritage, looking at the West, maybe following a third kind of, path. So that is exactly what has happened in India. See, Hinduism was there, Buddhism came in, Jainism came in, so many isms came in. What has happened to this ism? They kept on negotiating with the existing knowledge. Therefore, my whole idea of plural conversation is that we need to engage in a kind of conversation with the past, whether it's good or bad. And we have to also converse what Gandhi has said, I keep my windows open for the air to come from all sides. That we must be receptive to all ideas. It is not only that the intellectuals are only there in the West. There are a lot of philosophers and thinkers in the non-West, like in Japan, in China, or maybe in African countries, or for that matter in the Middle East. Therefore, knowledge should travel. But the people, those who accept knowledge, or those who engage with this knowledge, must be rooted in some kind of culture. And that is where the idea of intellectual diversity, cultural diversity and diversity of a culture. Therefore, we need to balance both these things when we talk about the university as a site of production of knowledge. Am I sufficiently clear, or did I leave anything? Professor Nanda? Professor Nanda, is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely. This fascinating. I mean, to hear from you at any moment, at any point of time, is always adds to our understanding and brings in new insights, new dimensions of how to engage with this enterprise of knowledge in different ways. But the problem with, I mean, as your title is very provocative, saying that it's more about discipline, and I'm really drawn to this idea of indiscipline within discipline, and leading to post-disciplines. And this is very, in a metaphoric use of this title. I mean, there is a strong metaphor which remains embedded as a soft text to your title. That is very provocative. Secondly, just quickly to add, because this takes us into another new area of, engagement at the moment, when now people have people have started to engage with this idea of making a distinction between globe and planet. As you know, that Dipesh Chakraborty has come up with this very famous book called Climate of History, as you were discussing then, and must be reading it, when he tries to take us to a different journey altogether, different experience of making sense of truth. You talked about agencies. This agency is very fascinating, and whether it is a human as agential being. As long as we do knowledge, as long as we remain confined to disciplinary practices which engage us with globe, or we tend to think in terms of the humanity uh, that remains that which remains at the center of the globe. uh, and when the question comes of thinking of alternatively of planet where human gets decentered, and we need to privilege agencies in terms of privileging ideas of spirit, gods, goddesses, non-humans. Even Naji says that we need to privilege the life of multicellular life. I mean, the multicellular life. So then the whole register of doing knowledge within within the domain of globe, modernity, political modernity, everything collapses, and paving new directions, new ways of looking at knowledge in different tracks. So that is again fascinating. And agency needs to be agencies needs to be problematized in that way. And I think you can come up with few comments on this to before you wind up. I think this could be kind of very. I mean, I'm really, what do you call? I'm persuaded to put this point of view before you, so that you can respond to it, a little bit.
You
Yeah.
have got a huge question. Actually, it's a planetary
No,
question.
just quickly. Yeah, planetary term, going beyond human being.
Actually, you see, this is a larger question. Actually, ecology, environment, culture, human society, technology, and among all these things, pandemic. You know, you see, the point is very simple. Let us for a while keep the discussion on theoretical front. The point to understand the human condition is very simple, in the sense that man is very insecure. See, if we start from this position that man is very insecure, then things will be a little clearer to us. Now, from where does this, where do these insecurities come from? These insecurities come from by certain things which are man-made, which are created by nature. See, what nature does, there is a scientific reason behind all its actions, because they have been, it is actually remarkable human genius. We have already established called the natural laws. And a natural calamity, except maybe the earthquake, for that we have a reason, but we cannot predict it. The rest of the natural calamities can be predicted. We know the answers for all calamities that actually visit us. And the ecological disaster is a part of that. We know why we are having an ecological disaster. Okay. Now, what is the debate about it? You see, you refer to Dipesh Chakrabarty. I like his work, and I like this provincializing Europe. And there is an essay by him, and it is a very, very interesting essay, because that is in the, you are talking about modernity and coloniality and all those things, artifice of a history. There is one piece by him, and it's very interesting. Who speaks for our past? That is the thing. Now, at the academic side, what do? We cannot help the disasters. We cannot help anything for that matter. We can actually discuss about it academically, dispassionately. We can do it, because most of the academics are not activists, so that you don't go and join somewhere as that Thunberg or somebody that girl is doing, to be a kind of activist, nature activist or human rights activist. We are not doing that. We look and engage with the problems. Therefore, what nature creates, that we know, we can predict, and we know the reasons. The point is, we are not able to provide the solutions. You see, our insecurity is played up so that, this is going to happen in the future. Odisha, you have the tradition of this apocalyptic texts, Achyutananda's Malika. So Malika is such a text which predict the future, what is going to happen. And most of the books on environment is like that. I have a totally different position on this. Therefore, I am not in a position to actually comment on Deepesh's book as a reader. I know the facts. And the other day we had a conversation about what he has written about. That is the kind of conversation I had with you. But if I am asked to comment on that book, I think I reserve my comments, because to me, for me, I look at things in a different way that maybe he has looked at. And one important point I liked about him is that he has talked about the history of climate, in a metaphoric sense. And he has tried to reason it out with giving some of the references from the European context, that who has said what and all those kind of things. But I'm not taking that way, but I have explained my position to that the human condition is always challenged. This is my position, both from man-made disasters as well as natural disasters. Natural disasters could be predicted. Man-made disasters could be stopped, because we didn't have that kind of deep reflection. What will be its consequence? That today I harm somebody, but tomorrow the harm I have caused to that person will visit me, as it has happened in case of, let us say, Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the human disaster. Now, this is where humanities come into play, that when we lack the human sense of humanity, we can create man-made disasters. That is the point.
Right.
And how these two things affect us, let us say, in the so-called modern institutions, as we talk about modernity and how modernity is associated with the progress, human growth, and all those blah, blah, blah. And as if the post-enlightenment idea for modernity is created as a discourse, as if it has no flaws at all, because it talks about human progress. But human progress at what cost? If enlightenment was such a perfect discourse, and it has produces institutions like democracy, legal institutions and what not, and also had encouraged, techno science kind of paradigms, then where has we gone wrong? So that is where we need a Foucault.
Exactly.
That has modernity put a trap, or are we trapped under modernity or in modernity, whereas modernity provided us a particular type of subjugated knowledge, because everything is good when there is money, and we forgot that maybe we are overspending or we are eating a lot of junk food because we have money. See, now this is precisely the trap of modernity. I don't look at modernity, counter-modernity, post-modernity. I don't look at things in that way. What I look at, personally, I feel is modernity is a powerful force. See, that cannot be denied at all. But is that modernity, which we have created for ourselves, is that modernity a trap also for us? And we cannot escape it. Now, that is the challenge. And that is what Foucault is relevant. I appreciate Foucault on that way, is that when we think of post-modernity, we have to think of the post-truth.
True.
See, that is the point. And the post-truth is a mode of liberation from subjugated knowledge. Yeah.
Yes.
And the environmental disaster is a post-truth. It was always with us, but now it has reached a stage, it is challenging each and everything. You create infrastructure as a motivational fact or progress of modernity, but nature destroys it as to give you a lesson that your truth doesn't stand. There is another truth which is created when the whole road is washed away by flood.
That is true.
Then how do you get out of it? That is the challenge, and that is an academic challenge. Of course, it is a political challenge and other things, so that is an academic challenge. That's it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, this is how we need to think about the ways of, looking forward, something like that. Yeah, instead of remaining only within being utopian, we need to craft ways of doing things. How do we get out of this mess? How do we get out of this crisis? How do we get out of this predicament? How do we make sense of this predicament? These are some of the questions which really should be privileged and should be uh, taken up very seriously. Thank you very much. I'll keep conversing with you. I mean, I need to stand to learn many things from your deep understanding on theoretical dimensions and reading into some of the very interesting areas of cultural studies is always quite a big help for people trying to think of adopting transdisciplinary approach to their own studies. So you are always, uh, critically important for many of us who are thinking about some of the issues from a different perspective. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nanda and Professor Baral. Now I would like to invite Dr. Jena if there are any.
Thank you so much, sir, for very wonderful deliberation. If your time permits, then I would like to ask just a few short questions with your short answers.
No, my time is for you only.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Sir, what is the difference? I know, sir, it's a silly question for you, but it's a very big question for my side. What is the difference between multidisciplinary research and interdisciplinary research? This is my first question. My second question is that what we should talk about the Western ideas for Marx to Habermas and Gramsci to Hegel. We don't have any Indian perspective theories or Indian perspective idea makers. And with add this question, why the idea makers always born in Western or Europe, not in India? What possibilities would be happened if Kautilya met Socrates once in his life? What is your ideas on them, sir? Thank you.
There are so many things. Let me start with your last question. When Kautilya would have met Socrates, they would have talked about their wives, but I am not sure whether Kautilya was ever married. Socrates was driven out from his house because of his wife. Second thing is why India has not produced great thinkers. That is not the right question. There are great thinkers India has produced, and we have not been able to get into the Indian philosophical tradition. And you know what the modern computer is running because of Panini's Astadhyayi, the generative principle of language and structure of sentences. And zero is a contribution of India. There are so many things actually, even the whole heliocentric worldview, that the sun is at the center of the universe is also a contribution of Indian astrology. See, there are so many things, but the point is why we know about the Western thinkers so much, not Indian thinkers. Well, simply they are not part of our teaching learning process. That is a great misfortune of Indian students. They do not know what is their cultural heritage or what is the contribution of India, because if you go through it, you would be amazed the kind of things that are there in the Indian knowledge system. Second thing is that when you talk about the ideas like Marx to other things that have developed in the West, You see, that is not surprising because the West has always engaged in a particular type of knowledge practice that is about the material world vis-a-vis the human position in that. And it has believed that the nature that is given to man is for its exploitation, not its preservation. And India has altogether different kind of principle about man's role in the universe. If you look at the whole Western tradition, intellectual tradition, you will find that the Western intellectual tradition, whatever may be called secular knowledge, has never been free from a kind of Christian view of the world. Let me put it in that way. Now, Christian view of the world is that there is only one God, or what is called monotheism. And if there is only one God, there is going to be only one idea of the world. Try to understand what I'm saying. And that world could be based on different, looking at from different context. It could be different way of looking at it. That God has made some people privileged, some people not privileged. And therefore, the idea of a one meaning of the world coming from a monotheistic kind of thinking has been very much there in the West. But in India, you will find from the very beginning, there is no concept of a monotheistic world. That the whole idea about the world and its understanding is plural. That is where there have been efforts to homogenize certain aspects, like let us say, writing a grammar of a particular dance. But that doesn't happen that it has come from one person. That happens when you come to the grammar of, let us say, Bharatanatyam or Odisha dance. This particular dance form historically has evolved and refined over a period of time, where it has come to a state that it is its final achievement and it should be written. Therefore, this is when we say classical, it is over refined, or refined is written by somebody or codified somebody at some stage, but it is not a single view of the world that is given in this kind of forms. Now here there is another kind of problem with the Western ideas, is that because this West believes in the one world view, it ultimately believed also that what the West believed that is universal, that is applicable across the universe, which is not true, because universality is not actually a homogeneity, but the universality is in a way actually to force a kind of homogeneity, because if everything is universal, then what is the value of particular, and what is the concept of diversity? Now, India is a plural society. It has a kind of plural cultures, and it has never believed in a one God or monotheism, or let us say one meaning of the world. And that is where the India has not fostered the ideas that have come from the West. And today you are amazed just thinking that, oh, there are so many thinkers in the West, they have come from, but they are not like that. Actually, if you start counting from, I was talking to Dr. Nanda's response. If you start with Descartes to Kant to Hegel, then you go to post-Kantians, the voluntarist and all that, you will find they are writing on each other's works and trying to show what is the limitation of the earlier philosophers' work and this. And therefore, this particular tradition of writing and commenting and rewriting a particular tradition, Descartes to Derrida, you will find it is one overarching tradition within which there are opinions, counter opinions, or some kind of a critique and counter critique and all these things that had continued. In India, it is very much diffused. That is the problem. The point is that, you have certain classics like Panini's or let us say Patanjali, they have refined some system and given it out. But you will find even in Mimamsa, which is a very, very rich tradition of logic in India, there are different kind of Mimamsas. Purva Bhag, Uttar Bhag, and all these kind of things are there. And at the same time, you have something that comes from outside altogether, the Buddhist logic, which is not part of this tradition. Now, this is where you will find plurality has always been welcomed. And therefore, there is no question of talking about a particular consequential philosopher from the West, because there are countries, they have done well without knowing the philosophers of the West. Because India was colonized, we have actually educated about the knowledge of the West so that we know about them and we compare peripherally with our thinkers. That is not the point. The point is, you look at China, people hardly bother about Western thinkers. They are happy with their Confucius, or let us say Jain, or some of their local thinkers. They still manage with it. There is absolutely no problem. But in India, we, as I have pointed out in my talk, we have this problem. The epistemic violence of the West has been so severe, and there is a particular group of intellectuals, they actually promote the West more in India than many in the West themselves. If you look at most of the books coming on post-colonial theory and everything, and even some of the very important works on Western culture or vis-a-vis Indian culture, they are being written by Indian scholars working in European universities, you see. And this is what is happening. But the thing is, the convenience with which we embrace the West, we do not do the same thing to our own tradition. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Dr. Jana, are you any other question?
No.
So thank you, sir. Another question from Professor Shubham Das. He's asking that we have not yet decolonized our mind from Eurocentric perspective. Why Indian thinkers have not celebrated in West as we are celebrating them? Here are the way Indians credited them. They are not. So what is your view on it, sir?
I have no view, because it is your question is very limited because I have not read enough. So the best books on Veda and interpretations of Veda comes from the West. One of the best Sanskrit scholars is from Chicago, this Sheldon Pollock, if you have heard his name. And he has a fantastic book called The Language of the Gods. He talks about Sanskrit cosmopolis. Fritz Stahl has a fantastic book on Vedas. And how much of we know about Odisha? You see, that is the thing we should ask ourselves. And that is the main focus of my talk. Have we got that epistemic inwardness? Now look at Odisha, what has happened? The best book so far, there is, I think some of you maybe or may not be knowing about it, is 17th century or 18th century book called Silpa Kalpa. And this particular book has actually done excellent work, and it is written by one person, Govinda Mahapatra from Dhenkanal area, about the temple architecture and its history in Odisha. And this is an amazing book which is written partly in Sanskrit, partly in Odia and all these kind of things. And this book has another subtle version of this which came after a century. And this book has been translated by a German scholar. And this is one thing. How much we are concerned about our thing, what is happening to the, you see, if you look at the Odisha creative landscape, there are 2-3 phases which are very important. And the Odia historians are eloquent about, let us say, about our modern writers, or maybe from 19th century onwards, they talk about everybody. And how much academic work has been done on Panchasakhas? And how much work has been done on the Bhima Bhavi? See, nobody has, I have not come across any literature, talking about the Bhima voice linguistic register, the poetic register. About Upendra Banja, we should know so much about Radhandra Roy and all this kind of thing. But how much work has been done on the Bhima voice? You see, as the Professor Nanda was talking about subaltern. How will you apply subaltern theory to Bhima voice? A blind, a marginal, a tribal, has nothing, no access to resources, nothing. Founder of a religion. But look at the richness of his poetry. You see, Sabdare Chaluchi, the word is working. Look at the richness of this thought. Sabda Brahma, when we talk about Sabda Brahma, Sabda Ra Chaluchi. Sabda is working. I have never come across such a kind of imaginative use of language. Similarly, Achyutananda, particularly I'm talking about Achyutananda. See, look at his language. So of course, we have Bhagavad Purana, it's a very nice language, but Achyutananda is totally different. You see, he is abstract at the same time, he is palpable. See, we have not done great service to our own culture and heritage. And that is the unfortunate part of it. And I don't blame anybody. It is because of the kind of education we have received. See, and that is where whatever we have, see, we have not done justice to that. See, I was talking about the apocalyptic text, that is a Malika. See, look at this particular tradition of an apocalypse. It is predicted. A disaster will come. It will visit so and so. It's okay, it has a religious part of it. Pralaya or apocalypse, it will visit us because there is a, people have become more sinful. That apart, I am marveling at the imagination, which is futuristic. You are putting your imagination on a task for the future. It could be considered a fantastic thing, or it could be called a thriller, or it could be called something else. As in Western genres, we have fantasies. But how fantasy and devotion, if we talk about that, spirituality and the fantasy prediction for the future can come together. And people can experience it. And that is the beauty of the work. These are some of the things we need to consider very seriously. And I have only one advice to my younger scholars, that look at your own heritage. Do your PhD for the degree from any university and whatever subject you want to, but after that, devote your research time, digging into Odisha's cultural resources. See, that is very important, because unfortunately, I have 42 years, I have stayed outside Odisha. I could not get the chance to read in Odia also. I have tried to get some books. I managed to get some books, but I didn't get any critical material on that. But those of you who are placed in Odisha and this particular academy, the institution card, the tribal development and all that, you work on tribal epistemology. What is tribal thinking? There are a lot of good tribal thinkers, like Raghunath Murmu or let us say Bhima Bhoi. And what is their actually view of the world, language, bhakti, poetry, how they have aestheticized their own feelings. This is one side. What is their modernity consciousness or modern consciousness, academic consciousness, or what is according to them education? See, we have not done these things. And this is the problem with our, education, let us say in tribal areas. I visited some schools, so these ashram schools and all these things in Koraput. For the students there, I understand Odia is their second language. It is not their mother tongue or the first language. Now English for them becomes third language. Sorry, Odia becomes third language and English becomes fourth language because they have their own ethnic tribal languages and they communicate among themselves in a linked language that is called Desia in Koraput. After that comes Odia. After that comes English. See, the textbooks that we have created for them, are those textbooks good for them? Have we understood the capacity of a child, how many languages to actually handle at the same time? These are some of the questions we need to ask to ourselves, actually. We should not go by the flow of people's interests and all the challenge of our time. And that is where humanities teaching could be meaningful. See, that if we add or attribute meaning and purpose as a humans to everything, every action, we should do good work. That's it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you. Now I would like to.
Maybe I'm not sure I answered your question directly or not, but there are problems. I'm just placing before you the problems that we have. Okay.
Okay, sir. Now we are going to conclude the session and inviting Dr. Samuel Lima for going for a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Dr.
Thank
Lima.
you so yes, thank you so much. On behalf of all the participants and organizer of World Human Sciences and Management Conference, I express my deep sense of gratitude to Professor K.C. Baral, former Pro Vice Chancellor of English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, for being with us and enlightening us on the topic Humanities today, Discipline and Post-discipline. Again, I thank you so much and very much, Professor K.C. Baral, for accepting our invitation from your busy schedule and joined us in this global digital platform. We are really thankful and grateful to you for your precious time with us. Also, I would like to thank the patrons of this conference, Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, the Director of IIM Sambalpur, and late Professor I. Ramavarman, the former Vice Chancellor of Central University of Odisha, for the indispensable support for organizing this type of such global program. I would also like to thank the conveners of the conference, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and the futurist, Mr. Charudat Panigai, for the valuable support. The core member of the conference, Professor Sharat Kumar Palit, for encouraging us from the beginning, and thank you so much, Professor Palit, for here with us. I would also like to thank all the technical supporters, Mr. Subham Das, Mr. Kamal Prasad Mohanty, Anirudh Jena, Mrs. and Mr. Priyanka Das, and Rudranarayan Das, Dr. Nupur Patnaik, and also special thanks to Dr. Subhash Chandra Varik, Dr. Piyadari Sikora, Dr. Syama Prasad Mishra, Dr. Nivedita Mohanty, and all the students, researchers, teachers, professors, academics from IIM Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, and Devonshire University, Cuttack, for connected and joined us in this global digital platform via Zoom meeting, Facebook, and YouTube. Also, finally, I would like to thank Dr. Bikram Kesarjana, the director of this conference, for gathered all of us together in this global digital platform. We all are thankful and grateful to Dr. Bikram Kesarjana. Thank you all. Stay well, stay safe. We are very much looking forward to see you again. Till then, bye-bye. Good night. The meeting is over.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And